Welcome back to the Ambient in Our YouTube channel, the home of album reviews, discography guides and think pieces. Now today's review is a review of the brand new Slipknot album called The End So Far. Now obviously Slipknot, one of the best new metal bands of all time, don't need any introduction. Their first two albums, self-titled and Iowa, easily the best in the genre in my opinion. I have more of a soft spot for self-titled, but Iowa is obviously crushing, and they went on to develop their sound further on albums like Volume 3 and All Hope Is Gone, the former of which I'm not a huge fan of for quite a few reasons that I've gone over before, but it's still not a bad album. I don't want people to get that impression, and I thought that their comeback with The Grey Chapter in 2014 was decent, and I thought that their newest album, We Are Not Your Kind, was probably the strongest set of songs they put out since Iowa. Like, it was really strong, so obviously you would think going into this new album I wouldn't have many kind of misgivings, apart from the fact that with the last album there was kind of a emerging sense of like pretentiousness in a way, mostly coming from Clown, who does like all the arts, and he's also the percussionist and backing vocalist. He was like, oh, you know, this last album is a masterpiece and all this blah blah blah, and you know, it was like full of interludes and just like random like ambient noises. Like probably 10 minutes of that album's runtime could have been cut out and it would have been absolutely fine, but you know, the whole thing of oh, this thing is a masterpiece, we're operating on another level. And I think always the comments by him calling Slipknot a culture always kind of rubbed me the wrong way as him being a bit up himself, and so I hoped that that would maybe kind of be curbed with the next album. Although given that the first piece of press he ever did for this new album, he called what they were doing God music, my eyes raised onto another plane of existence. Like, seriously, you're calling it God music now? Like, oh, for God's sake. Although I was slightly, relieved to see that there were no interludes on the new record, and that it was also maybe, you know, the shortest album of their career, running time wise. So I thought, hey, you know, maybe they've trimmed the fat a little bit. All I could really hope for is that they maybe dialed the pretentiousness down a bit and just got back to making like real good, like fist pumping music. And obviously I wasn't against experimentation in concept, because they did that on We Are Not Your Kind with tracks like The Liar's Funeral that I thought went over really well. So obviously they can keep that experimentation to a degree, just don't let it go overboard, if anything. So after a few listens, here's what I thought of Slipknot's brand new album, The End So Far. The opener is Adderall, and is easily the most boldly experimental track on the whole album, so I think the fact that they started off with this right out the gates really kind of says something about their conviction to this, which I kind of appreciate, because contrary to popular opinion, I actually think this song works really well, despite a couple misgivings which I'll get into. So I feel like the kind of sitar melody, I think it is in the intro, sounds fairly intriguing and works nicely to kind of set this sort of otherworldly kind of mysterious vibe that the track definitely builds on, although I would say that it didn't really need to go on for more than like 15 seconds or so, and the fact that the intro to this song, which mostly just comprises of that repeating melody and a load of random electronic noises, is kind of pointless, and it already kind of set off red flags in my head as to like, oh, so they're not doing interludes, but they are doing the weird kind of transitional tissue thing that I really also didn't like off of We Are Not Your Kind, where like the last minute and a half of a track would just be bookended by nonsense. But anyway, getting off of that, I do think that the drum beat, when it comes in, although simplistic, which many people have pointed out, is very punchy and works nicely with the vibe of the song once the other instrumentation comes in. And I feel like the way that that is complemented by these kind of shrill sounding keyboards, some nice bass too, psychedelic kind of hazy guitars, and also some pianos as well, it works really nicely to kind of foster that atmospheric, psychedelic, otherworldly vibe. It almost sounds like something off of an Elbow album in a way. And I guess Radiohead comparisons aren't entirely out of the realm of possibility either, because I do kind of get them. And I do think that Corey switches up his vocal style reasonably to fit this mould, having a lot more of a kind of graceful, more understated vocal delivery, but still one that delivers a very compelling performance. And I think particularly with the more kind of swirling chorus and the backing melodies that come through on that, it definitely has an Elbow vibe to it, but one that I can definitely appreciate. And I think the choirs are used very tactfully as well. And yeah, I think overall, while a lot of fans really have disdain for this track, probably because of how different it is, I really enjoy it. And despite how massively different it is from everything else they've done in their entire careers pretty much, I think it's a really strong start. The second track is the dying song brackets Time to Sing, and this is just classic Slipknot all over really, and I can't complain much about it because it has everything here. The classic sinister percussion intro with Corey's commanding vocals, then you go into this classic just driving Slipknot verse, you know, great chugging guitar work, militant drums, classic use of percussion, some good old keg bashing, Corey's rapid fire vocal delivery. Everything sounds fantastic here in my opinion. The riffs work great. I think that the use of a higher melody in the pre-chorus works really well as well, and I think despite how melodic the chorus is, and it maybe might take a few listens for it to like fully, you know, for you to get it, I suppose, or for at least it took me a few listens to kind of get what it was trying to do, but I do definitely enjoy it. And I think that while Stone Sour comparisons are maybe a little bit kind of overused at this point, like, I don't think it's entirely, you know, warranted in this case, because I do think it sounds like classic Slipknot, but in a more melodic sense. And as well, I really like that this song makes use of every element of the band to its full effect, because obviously you've got the prominent percussion in not only the marching snares, but also kegs and the toms, but also in the use of turntables and keyboards and weird kind of electronic effects throughout the whole song. They really know how to utilize every element of their band really well on this song, and I feel like even the bass is more prominent with that run in the bridge where you can really hear Alessandro, I think his name is, really tearing it away on that bass, and it sounds really cool. I think the really slamming build up into the bridge is nice as well. Like, everything on this track works really well in my opinion, and the fact that it's only 3 minutes and 20 seconds long, it does a hell of a lot in its runtime. Track number 3 is the first single, the Chapeltown Rug, and this thing yet again is just classic Slipknot all over. Like, the percussion and turntables in the intro work really well. Again, I'm going to say it, on this album they know how to utilise their extras really well, because they felt like on past albums, even on We Are Not Your Kind, which had all that weird electronic ambient stuff, but I feel like that was more the work of Clown rather than the people who were actually designated to make those sounds within the group. But I feel like, you know, they really know how to utilize those elements anyway, so I feel like that works really well. Corey's kind of signature villainous vocals are nice too, and then we just go into another classic heavy verse, like great riffs, pounding like percussion, great rapid fire drums. Corey's vocals are just absolutely on point with their ferocity and the speed of their delivery. It sounds great. The blast beat in the pre-chorus is great. I feel like the chorus, again, while it has kind of a non-typical melody to it, and it does take a little while to adjust to what it's trying to do, it does have a very odd sort of understated catchiness to it, which I like a lot. I feel like the marching snares in the bridge are really cool as well, and I feel like the thudding outro is absolutely heavy as hell. So this song is probably the heaviest on the whole album, or at least one of them, I would say. So yeah, this song is pretty great, honestly, from an instrumental side of things anyway. Like, everybody is just firing on all cylinders all the time. The melodies are great, the vocal delivery itself is great. The only thing I really have a problem with is the lyrics, because from the title of Chapeltown Rug, you may be able to kind of make some connections to one Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and thinking like, why would they be talking about the Yorkshire Ripper? Well, thing is, they're not. I feel like the way Corey does the lyrics on this is kind of simultaneously cringy but also incredibly tacky, because he's using the fact that during the Yorkshire Ripper trial, they misrepresented either the investigation or the victims itself, and kind of uses that to parallel how social media like kind of distorts the realities of life, and like how people just want to live in echo chambers. And it kind of rubs me, and I'm sure a lot of people, the wrong way to hear somebody using like the, you know, like an allegory of a serial murderer to like, oh, social media bad. And so I feel like that element of the track is easily its weakest, but from a musical standpoint, this thing is absolutely fantastic. It's just the lyrics are just really not his best. Track number 4 is Yen, which was characterised by Corey as being kind of his ode to goth metal bands like Typo Negative, which, full disclosure, I'm not really that familiar with, but regardless, this song is a pretty good one, because again, it does quite a lot in its runtime, and I can respect Slipknot for one thing on this album, is that they tend to do a lot with their songs' runtimes, and this is no exception. So I feel like the electronics in the intro are cool, although they maybe do go on a touch too long again, and that's going to be a reoccurring problem, so just be ready for me to start repeating myself. But I do quite like the intro to this song. It's very kind of mysterious and very murky, I suppose, in a way. The way the bass sounds is really intriguing. The use of things like glockenspiels and various kind of keyboards is nice too. I feel like Corey's softer vocal delivery works well to kind of help foster that more dramatic, kind of subdued but also subtly kind of tense vibe that it has about it. I feel like when the drum beat comes in on the verse, it has a really kind of odd, swirling, psychedelic quality, which I like a lot, especially aided by the guitar lines, which sound great here. I think the use of more prominent percussion with the toms in the background of the verses is nice too, and I feel like the chorus is another melodic one, but with a definite sense of grit to it, and the riff is really great here. It almost sounds like sort of verging on metalcore, I suppose, in a way, which normally is a kind of comparison that I would roll my eyes at, but I think it works well here. I think the utilisation of turntables and percussion in the bridge works very, very nicely. Sid Wilson is really like the black horse of this album. Like, he does so much, and pretty much all of it is always worthwhile, so I really have to commend him on that. And the touches of percussion in the background are cool as well, and I feel like the riff switch after this bridge is absolutely brutal. Like, it is just the most chugging, heavy thing possibly on this whole album. Like, it really has a gravitas to it, which I love. And then I also think the kind of second bridge switch into a more melodic, atmospheric kind of vibe works very nice too, because Corey's very soaring vocals work really well over these sort of subtle chiming melodies and these very swirling, clean guitars. I think it's a very different sound for the band again, but one that, as I say, works quite effectively within the context of a track that has taken so many stylistic left turns that I kind of don't really know what to do anymore, but that's definitely a good thing. The fifth track is Hive Mind, which, despite a few misgivings, is another really, really strong one in my opinion, because while the intro is yet again just over half a minute of random nonsense, like, I don't understand why they keep feeling the need to do this. Like, just get a good song, get it finished, and then get out. You don't need to like build up from it or like cool down from it with a minute or so of just like random shit. So like, why? I don't really see what the need is. Anyway, when the riff comes in and the blast beat in the intro, my god, it is brutal as hell. And especially when complemented by touches of sinister electronics and the more higher guitar melodies that come along with it, it is almost black metal in a sense, especially with those higher guitar lines, but it is brutal as all hell. And the verse, again, is another classic Slipknot verse. Corey's vocals are super menacing throughout, which is nice. The drums sound great. There's some really nice prominent percussion work. Obviously, just that classic kind of boom bang kind of approach to the kegs on this one, which is obviously always great because it's nice to have that extra kind of texture to things. And again, I feel like this track has a lot of things going for it in this like super heavy department, but also has some experiments that I quite like as well, because I feel like the gang backing vocals that go throughout this song almost sound like something off of a thrash album, but it also kind of helps to add that extra heaviness to it, which I really, really enjoy. I feel like the marching snares and the organs in the bridge are a really nice touch. I mean, definitely one that was unexpected, but I'll take it. And I feel like the breakdown around the 4:30 mark is particularly great too. The only thing I would say in detriment to this song really is that while I do like the melody on the chorus, because the rest of this song is so just like gnarled teeth, just like punching walls, as you want a great heavy Slipknot song to be, the fact that this chorus is so melodic, while again I do like it, it doesn't really fit with anything else within the rest of the song. It kind of feels like they had a verse and a bridge and they were like, oh, we need a chorus, and so just kind of wrote one without really much regard as to how it fits into the song as a whole. But despite that, you know, I do again like the melody on the chorus, as I've said like 3 times already, and I feel like the rest of the track is just brilliant anyway, so it's nothing too major really. The track at the halfway point is Warranty, and is yet again another pretty strong one, because I feel like this one, again, has quite a lot of ideas, most of which go over pretty well. So I do think that the intro, again, is fantastic. Just those classic chugging heavy riffs with Corey's sinister vocals and the touches of electronics. I feel like when the kind of faster blast beat type drum beat comes in, it sounds fantastic, and the way the kind of phased turntables go over the top of it sounds fantastic. I feel like when you get to the verses, while I do like the riffs and the drums and the prominent percussion is nice at points too, I feel like that Corey's delivery of the vocals can come across slightly awkward at points, whether it's kind of like him being doubled with a lower version of his own vocals, which always sounds tacky, or using that weird kind of metal band drive-through effect on his voice at points. So there are things about his vocals, particularly on the first verse here, that I find a little awkward in their delivery, but it's nothing too distracting. I feel like the chorus works really, really well with this super muscular groove and these great riffs, a really slamming drum beat as well, and I feel like the use of gang vocals here is really, really great and helps to add, again, that extra gravitas to it that I really, really like. There's a drama to it, but without losing any of that heaviness. It works really, really effectively in my opinion. I think the speed change with the guitar solo is nice, and I also think the bridge works well with the kind of shifting guitar lines to a more atmospheric kind of grand vibe. Although what I would say about the bridge is that the use of choirs here feels a little tacked on, and it does have a tendency to drown out Corey's vocals a little bit, but it still is a very, very good song overall, because while I do have maybe some problems with either Corey's vocal delivery or maybe the execution in the bridge not being quite there at points, I do think that this is still a very strong song. Track number 7 is Medicine for the Dead, and it's a bit of a mixed bag, a mostly positive one probably, but still with a couple of problems that I would like to point out, namely the intro and outro to this track. I mean, I know that I've talked about how some of the intros to these songs are just like half a minute of droning noise, and well, this is also the case here, apart from that it goes on in the intro and in the outro, because while I do like the synthesizer in the intro, I think it sounds quite intriguing, it did not need to go on for over a minute, and same could be said for the weird kind of like guitar feedback and vocoders in the outro. It's just completely unnecessary. This song is 6 minutes long, but it may as well have been 4 minutes long. Like, there was just like over a third of this song probably could have been cut, and that's just making up at the intro and the outro. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I feel like when the song starts proper, the use of clean guitars and chimes in the intro is a very alluring one. Kind of reminds me of maybe Sarcastrophe off of the Grey Chapter in a way, which is definitely not a bad comparison. And I feel like when the main riff comes in, it's definitely different, but one that I can for sure appreciate, because it's got that real chugging heaviness, but also the use of kind of higher melodies at points is very nice too. I feel like the verse with the emphasis on percussion again works very, very well. I think Corey's vocal performance is solid throughout the song. I feel like he can kind of very well adapt to whatever kind of style that he's trying to kind of foster in this song, and I feel like his screams over the more heavy parts are absolutely brutal. The chorus on this I'm kind of a bit weird about, because while it's alright, I mean, I do think it comes across a little bit melodically awkward, and I know that some people have had that criticism of tracks like the Chapeltown Rug being a bit melodically awkward, but for me, that track was kind of passable in that regard. This is probably the most potent example of that kind of melodic awkwardness that has been discussed a couple of times in relation to this album. But I also think the bridge and the breakdown are really effective, being simultaneously quite strange but also crushingly heavy at points too, which is absolutely fantastic. Again, I feel like the main body of this song shows that Slipknot can do that kind of experimentation within their sound really, really well. It's just the pointless like 2 minutes of nonsense that bookend each part of this track that really just does my head in, because you would have had a solid track on your hands if not for just kind of padding it out with random nonsense. The next track is acidic and is kind of what Jay Weinberg referred to as the heaviest blues song of all time, but Corey more sort of saw it as a more grungy or stoner rock type track, which both of those comparisons I think are valid, and I'll get into that in a minute. But again, enough with the ambient noise, guys. All right, if 2 minutes of ambient noise on the last track wasn't enough, we also start this track with another half a minute of random bleepy nonsense. So I mean, I guess well done for consistency. I don't really know. But I do quite like the intro to this when the riff and the groove pop in, because I feel like it's very sort of foreboding, quite sinister as well with the higher guitar lines, and I feel like the marching snare groove gives it that quite militant quality, which is nice. I feel like the very minimal nature of the verses mostly kind of allows it to dwell in its own atmosphere, which can work quite well at times, because despite being understated, it does have some quite cool ideas going on. Although I do think that Corey switches from kind of melodic vocals to heavier shouted vocals at points throughout the track are slightly awkward, especially when it's kind of transitioning from the verse into the pre-chorus, or into the chorus I should say. Whether that transition of vocals is as smooth as he would want it to be, I'm not quite sure. But again, you know, the grooves are decent, the guitars work nicely, the percussion is used well as well. I feel like the build-up particularly is done quite nicely. The bluesy solo is also quite a nice touch as well. But I don't know, man, there's just something about this track that I can't really shake. Like, I don't, like, it's all right. Like, a lot of the musical ideas here are like decent, sure, but it doesn't leap out at me nearly as much as every other track here has so far. I mean, you know, maybe it's because blues rock is maybe like, I mean, I guess I can't really say much because Adderall is an alternative rock track, but I feel like if they were going to do a blues rock track, they kind of almost undercooked it a little bit, and so it just comes across slightly underwhelming. And again, I think the minimal outro is just pretty redundant. Like, all it is just some very faint guitar lines and light drums, and the auto-tune on Corey's vocals is just downright head scratching. So while some of the musical ideas here are decent, I can't help but feel pretty underwhelmed. Track number 9 is Heirloom, and is a pretty weird one to say the least, because I really like the intro on this. I feel like the really thundering use of drums and percussion in the intro is super cool, and I feel like when it gets joined with the riffs and the turntables, it just is absolutely Slipknot in classic form. Just the really chugging heavy riffs, the use of turntables works really nicely as well, and obviously the thundering rhythm section sounds fantastic. But then when the verse kicks in with the riff and groove switch, I mean, kill me if you want, but this just kind of sounds like a heavier Nickelback song. Like, I mean, you know, I don't, kill me if you want for making that comparison, but it just sounds kind of like quite flat and generic, just kind of dun 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 dun. Like, it's just not really doing much interesting. Corey vocally isn't really doing anything that jumps out at me much at all, really. Like, it's just super underwhelming, and the chorus definitely doesn't help with the Nickelback comparisons, because I feel like it's not doing anything so melodically kind of out there that you can kind of give it praise, and it's not like so overly catchy that it kind of, you know, you can tell they're trying to go for that. It's just kind of very sort of, yeah, it's hummable, but it's just kind of very middle of the road, very average, and it's just kind of, it's a really underwhelming song. And I'll say this as well, the intro to this song sets a bar that the rest of the song just face plants into in comical fashion, because I don't know what is going on. Like, they switch from really classic Slipknot sounding stuff in the intro to just sounding like a slightly heavier version of Nickelback for essentially the rest of the song's runtime, and so I'm just really underwhelmed. The next track is H377, or what I might as well just call Hell, and this one is quite a weird one because it is a good song, but there's also just some things about it that I'm not quite sure how to make heads or tails of. So, for starters, while I do think the noisy intro, again, is kind of redundant, why do they keep doing this? Anyway, I'll move on now. I do think that the thundering toms and the chanted vocals in the intro sound super cool. It almost reminds me of maybe the track Angst of the most recent Rammstein album, you know, that kind of very industrial but also slightly gothic and tribal thing going on, which is really nice. And I feel like when the riffs pop in and the turntables as well, the way the groove kind of works with those. It does definitely have that very industrial vibe, so I guess this can maybe be seen as a degree of Rammstein worship going on here, which I'm definitely okay with. Although I do feel that in the verse, while I do like the riffs and the groove, again, as I say, I feel like Corey's vocal delivery is just so much more stilted in comparison to his more rapid fire deliveries on tracks like The Dying Song or Chapeltown Rug. Like, I just feel like it sounds so stilted and so forced here. I don't know why that is, but it just sounds really awkward to my ears. And while I do like the chorus, I feel like the way they use the chanted vocals is very nice. The solo is nice too as well. I just feel like, if anything, I do enjoy this song, but there's elements of it, particularly with the rapid fire delivery and the use of like turntables and stuff, I feel like it's almost kind of like they're trying to replicate their older stuff. And I know that that is obviously kind of a ridiculous comparison to make, because you've literally said that, like, oh, it sounds like classic Slipknot, but I feel like there's a difference between doing a song that definitely stylistically calls back to your older work and deliberately trying to replicate it. To me, there is a definite difference there. And to me, I feel like this is definitely just them kind of going into the studio and kind of going, oh, you know, people might not be satisfied if we give them a load of super melodic tracks, so we just need kind of one heavy one that kind of sounds like our old stuff to fill stuff out. And I think of all of the tracks here, you can tell that this is them deliberately trying to contrive something, or at least it feels that way. Okay, so on reflection, I feel like my comments of them deliberately trying to mimic their older stuff are kind of a little bit unfair, given that, as I said, there is a bit of kind of an industrial Rammstein influence coming through, so I can give them that it's not completely derivative in that sense. That being said, I do think that the idea that this is a song concocted to fill some kind of heaviness quotient and is kind of contrived in that sense, I do think is an idea that still rings true for me, and especially the fact that they fell on their face attempting that. The penultimate track is called Desard, and honestly, I'm not a really big fan of this, because talking about kind of ripping stuff from your older repertoire, on the intro to this, they just rip off their own song. They literally just play the intro from prosthetics off of Self-Titled. Like, everything from the clattering kegs to the toms to the like sinister higher guitar melodies, it's just straight ripped from prosthetics. Like, it's just ridiculous at this point. Like, as soon as I heard this track, I was like, what the hell is going on? What are they doing? But saying that, the change in guitar leads into the rest of the song is quite kind of psychedelic and alluring, and I feel like some of the melodies coming through on guitar here are quite intriguing. But when you get to the rest of this song is really when my kind of interest starts to die down a bit, because for me, like, this track is decent, yes, like the riffs are decent, the grooves work nicely, Corey's vocals are fairly solid, there's some decent builds in intensity, I suppose, as well, but like, this track instantly, as soon as it started, just felt so much more nondescript than a lot of the other tracks here, and I'm not quite sure exactly why that is. I feel like it's maybe because the track is going for a bit more of a melodramatic, overly dramatic sound, which I guess can tick boxes for some people if you like that. I mean, especially Corey's vocal delivery kind of speaks to that, and the more kind of mid-pace and tone of the instrumental generally does kind of reflect that. But for me, it just kind of comes across quite boring. Like, yes, it's not awful, right? Like, some of the riffs are decent, the grooves too. Corey's vocals are performed solidly, I guess, but there's just not really a lot about this track that interests me, because I'm not really a huge fan of like these melodramatic metal tracks that they've done a couple of times on their more recent output, and to be honest, they've always been my least favourite, and this one, if anything, just kind of speaks to that more. And of course, there's another pointless, noisy outro to round things off, so good to see they're ending it well. And the closing track is suitably titled Finale, and I feel like, if anything, this is just my same criticism from the last track, but worse. Because while I do think that the bass and the pianos and the vocals in the intro sound nice, as do the strings, they do sound incredibly melodramatic, as does the whole song, incidentally, because, again, while I can appreciate them going for a bit more of a dramatic spin here, like with the string sections and the choirs that get added later on, the more kind of soaring use of riffs here is definitely a kind of indicator of them going in that direction. But I don't know, as much as they kind of are going for a really bombastic, dramatic ending, I just can't get much out of it. Like, Corey's vocals, yes, they're decent, but this whole song just kind of feels a little bit flat, which I know is definitely not the intention, obviously, because it's trying to go for this really kind of dramatic feel. But I don't know. This style for them really does nothing for me. Like it might sound decent to some people, but for me, it's just kind of drama for the sake of drama, if anything. Like the choirs here particularly seem really tacked on. Like there was no need for them to be here. And again, another minute-long outro of basically just bass and piano fading out into nothing was just completely unneeded. So while I can appreciate this track in principle, I suppose, for trying to do something a bit more grand and dramatic with its use of maybe more soaring riffs, a bit of a slower pace, use of strings and choirs, it just, in practice, it does absolutely nothing for me.
Now it's a shame, but I gotta stay, 'cause I like it here. And now it's the same.
So, what did I think of Slipknot's brand new album, The End So Far? Well, I think it's kind of difficult to say, because for me, I feel maybe the most underwhelmed I have about a Slipknot album in a very, very long time. And don't get me wrong, there are good songs here. I would say maybe the first 6 or 7 tracks are really, really strong, for the most part anyway. But, like, I don't know, there's just something about this album, especially in the second half, because while the first half is solid, yes, I had a few criticisms here and there, but it was solid, right? And I feel like even some of the attempts at experimentation, specifically Adderall, go over pretty well. But, that being said, the quality drop-off after, like, track 7 is pretty stark, to be honest. I don't know what it was. It was almost as if they were kind of trying to make 2 albums, because, like, Acidic, for me, really kind of spelt the drop-off of this album, and for me, I just can't really get past it. Like, the first half of this album, don't get me wrong, is really, really solid. You've got some classic-sounding Slipknot stuff, some stuff that experiments a little bit more, most of which goes over fairly well, sure, but it definitely feels like an album of 2 halves, and one half is definitely way weaker than the other. And I feel like even the stronger tracks on this album don't exactly measure up to the strongest moments on tracks like We Are Not Your Kind, for example, because tracks like Solway Firth on that, I feel like if you put those toe-to-toe with tracks like the Chapeltown Rug, I feel like those would win out over these ones. But it's very kind of a specific personal taste thing in that regard. And also, I can't help that say that, like, you know, the random minutes of random, like, ambient noise, 10 minutes could have easily been cut off of this album and we would have been absolutely fine. And I feel like with the kind of rise in pretension with the music videos and the art and some of the music obviously on the album, I can't help but kind of feel like Slipknot is almost turning into an art metal band, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. If I had to think of a score, I mean, it's not a strong 6. I'd say it just about clings on to a light 7. I was originally going to give it like a strong 5 because it felt really underwhelming, but I think after a few more listens that was quite harsh, so it just about gets to that light 7 level. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. Coming up, interview, discography guide, some other really cool stuff as well. I feel like sometimes whenever I do these like end card slates, I don't really have a lot to say, but the new Joji album is coming out in November, so that should be coming out relatively soon when this goes up. I think less than a month after this goes up, that album will be out, so I'm quite interested in reviewing that as well. There's also been a few albums that have been announced for the new year. I mean, obviously I normally touch on those in my year in review videos, but all I'm going to say now is that the albums that are slated to come out later on or earlier on next year are ones that I'm definitely very excited about. I feel like, again, like I say, the remasters video was you know, received fairly well, and so I feel like me maybe switching up the content a bit more within the next few like weeks or so might, you know, be a welcome change for me, because it does get a bit boring doing the same reviews over and over. So I hope that if I do end up doing some more different styles of content, that you enjoy it as much as you seem to do the last one. But until next time, I'll see you all later.